Hi, guys. Okay. Hi, Vish. It is Wednesday. The 49ers have won 14 straight regular season games, and they are 4-0 to start the season. It's a great time to be a 49ers fan, and I'm really excited to do a stream with you. Always thought you've had such good knowledge. I am really looking forward to this upcoming game, but before we get into the Cowboys game, I thought it'd be fun to recap a little bit of your opinions on that Cardinals performance. I mean, it was literally record breaking. So I'd just like to know how you felt about it. Brock Purdy, CMC, where to start? It's been pretty fantastic. Christian McCaffrey has looked like another level, breaking Jerry Rice's record. What were your main takeaways coming out of that game?
Yeah, I don't know that I have anything new to add to the conversation. I think a lot has been said over the last couple of days, and I think it all applies in this particular case. Obviously, the number one takeaway for me is that right after the first game of the season, I felt like, okay, if the 49ers maintain the one seed, I think Christian McCaffrey is going to have a good MVP shot. And I think that through a quarter of the season, he's got to be the MVP right now of football. And then besides that, I think Purdy is obviously playing exceptional. I think it's somewhat mind blowing to think about the fact that there's been no drop in level from him, despite the fact that he went through the entire injury this offseason. He had kind of an abbreviated return with no setback, which is something new for 49ers fans with injury returns. And then he had no lingering trauma, mental or physical, from having to deal with that injury. He's come back in and looked like a player that never went through offseason surgery, which is a big, big deal. And it's really cool to see. And it's no slight feat, in my opinion.
I completely agree. We can touch on this in a second because I want to touch on the MVP thing first. But I find it amazing the chemistry that he has with his wide receivers. You see it. I've seen it specifically with Ayuk and CMC, and you think they didn't even really practice together this offseason because he was rehabbing. That's like, in my brain, I'm like, that could even get better. That means the more they play together, it's pretty amazing to see. But I actually remember I saw your tweet of you saying that Christian McCaffrey, if they did win that number one seed versus maybe the Eagles might be their biggest competition, that he would have a shot for MVP. And then I was talking to a friend who is a Bucks fan, so they need to sort out their life decisions anyways. But they were asking me when I said that, because I agreed with your tweet and I was making the case for them that, since Christian McCaffrey has joined, aside from the Chiefs game, which he was here for 3 seconds before that game happened, that they've won all these games. And I kind of attribute so much of that to Christian McCaffrey and like having that easy out for a quarterback when they do feel like they're in trouble. And then I think this year, which is crazy because last year he was performing so well, but this year he seems to be seeing the holes better, hitting even harder, getting more yards after contact, which is incredible. So I stole your tweet and then in real life was telling my friend this as if it was my idea. And they were kind of like, okay, well, if Kyle had to choose between Christian McCaffrey and Purdy, like who would be the guy who is most valuable to the team through those, like which one would they trade is what my friend said. But I'm interpreting that as, because when I was saying, okay, Christian McCaffrey should be MVP, they were like, well, why not Purdy? And I was like, well, I think it's more of Christian McCaffrey than Purdy. And then they were like, okay, well, if you had to trade one, which one would you keep? And I thought that was an interesting question that I hadn't thought about, because obviously that takes more into account positional value and stuff. So what do you think? I'd love to ask you your opinion on that, like what you would do, and then also what you think Kyle would do.
Yeah, it's kind of a difficult question because I think Christian McCaffrey is obviously the better of the two players. He's better at his position than Purdy is at his position. I mean, Christian McCaffrey is the best running back in the NFL. I don't know that anybody's going to say Brock Purdy, as well as he's playing, is the best quarterback in the NFL. But then you take positional value into account, and there is some value to a quarterback playing at a high level, regardless of what's surrounding him. And I don't know what I think I would probably take Christian McCaffrey just because I think there's more quarterbacks that could succeed in this offense with this, maybe not to the extent Brock Purdy has, but I think there are quarterbacks capable of succeeding to an extent with this offense and this infrastructure than there are, running backs capable of changing offensive production the way Christian McCaffrey has been. And I think Kyle would probably take Christian McCaffrey too. But that being aside, I don't think it's disrespectful to Purdy in any capacity because he's played awesome.
He definitely has. And I think Kyle is Kyle's very smitten with both of them. I've actually been really impressed with, I wonder if this is kind of a segue too, but I wonder if you have noticed a difference in how Kyle has spoken about Purdy compared to other quarterbacks. And if you think, because this is a question that I had to ask myself, do you think that this is like because Purdy is bringing that out of him because he genuinely feels so much more impressed or happy with Purdy? Or do you think like this offseason, maybe he reflected and he was like, oh, I should be more encouraging within like the public eye of my quarterback? Because I don't think we've ever today, wasn't Kyle Shanahan asked, like, do you think Purdy is just a system quarterback? And I think maybe my initial reaction was like, no coach is going to be like, yeah. But I somehow feel like if Kyle was asked that about Jimmy, he would have like slid in some sort of slight. Like, I don't think he ever has praised the quarterback as much as he has Brock Purdy. And I don't know if that's because Brock Purdy literally is doing better in the 49ers system, in my opinion, than any other quarterback they've had, or if because Kyle Shanahan is like so impressed with him. What do you think? If you
Sorry, what was the question? Sorry.
Do you think that Kyle's change in the way that he has spoken about his quarterback this year?
Oh, okay. I follow it now. Sorry about that.
No worries.
I think that it is strictly Brock Purdy driven. I don't know that not anything has really changed in terms of how he discusses the position. I mean, we saw him discuss Sam Darnold for an offseason and Trey Lance for an offseason, and there wasn't the same way he has talked about Brock Purdy. It's something I'd been highlighting this entirety of this offseason. Even when this quarterback conversation was going on, a lot of people suggested that, it feels like Kyle is the one in the 49ers organization that's not as into Brock as everybody else. That was a suggestion at a point in the offseason. And I could never follow that one publicly just because of the way Kyle always has talked about Brock Purdy. And he's always talked about Brock Purdy with as much praise as he's talked about any football player with it in his time with the 49ers.
Yeah, for sure. Calling him the real deal. Even last season after he first stepped in, I think he said he knew like after the Bucs game that he was different. So that's definitely really high praise. So going into this Cowboys game, I really quickly wanted to ask you, do you think that this is the first test that the 49ers are facing? Like, do you think that the Cowboys defense is going to be harder? Do you think that the team is going to be more prepared? What do you think we can take away from the 3-0 start? I feel like some people might be, and myself included, might have like downplayed it in the past. Just like that the competition the talent hasn't been the same. And I feel like maybe going against the Cowboys might be like a more real facing competition. What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a step up in competition, but to me, it would be a different conversation if the 49ers weren't steamrolling their competition. Like, sure, you can play teams that we consider quote unquote not good, though I think through 4 weeks, Arizona has been a lot better than a lot of teams. They beat Dallas. I think the Rams are better than a lot of teams. I think a lot of us didn't expect the Rams to be so good. And then, the Giants suck, and Pittsburgh, I thought Pittsburgh would be better. I still think Pittsburgh's going to finish somewhat decent because that's just what they do under Mike Tomlin. The next time they have a losing season with Mike Tomlin will be the first time, but they suck right now. So you could argue that 2 of the games were somewhat against medium level competition and then 2 were against 2 terrible teams. Regardless, the Niners have been steamrolling the competition. And so I just feel like, what else are you supposed to say about how they're producing? And then in regard to the matchup against Dallas, I think it's a little bit of the issue that the Rams have with the 49ers, where it's just a bad matchup on paper for both of these two teams. Now, that doesn't mean that's actually what's going to happen in the football game. When you look at it on paper, and you want to just simplify the game in simplest terms, get out of the nuances and the X's and O's, to me, Dallas's number one team asset is their defense's team speed. Their defense's team speed is real. It causes problems to other teams. It overwhelms other teams. Now, the issue is the Niners deal with speed very well. They're just as fast as Dallas, but they're also bigger and stronger than Dallas. And that's the problem. It's the same thing as the Rams, where up front and inside, the Niners are just a bigger and more physical football team on both lines of scrimmages than Dallas. And that's where, if you look at the last two playoff games, in its core, what really happened is Niners just wore Dallas down. That physicality, the physicality that they had to play with, the Niners understood that they just didn't have to make a mistake. Dallas is a team, especially on defense, that preys on mistakes. They prey on negative plays and turnovers. That's what the hallmark of their defense is. They force more turnovers than anybody ever since Dan Quinn has taken over. So they simply are an excellent defense in terms of forcing turnovers. Well, we saw the Niners understand that when they played the Dallas Cowboys in the divisional round last year. They had a very conservative game plan, and they understood that all they have to do is outlast Dallas because physically they're bigger and better than Dallas. And I think we're going to see a case in point of that. Dallas tried to add some size this offseason. They got Mozzie Smith in the draft. We'll see how that turns out, but that's not going to be enough in this matchup. Again, I'm not predicting what's going to happen because honestly, anything can happen in a football game on Sunday. But when you project the game on paper, to me, the matchup is just very favorable for the 49ers on both sides of the ball. And that's what really ends up happening. And that's where, to me, once again, just like it was in the divisional round and just like it was even in the playoff game 2 years ago, the 49ers quarterback doesn't make a mistake or doesn't make mistakes to let Dallas back into the football game as we saw 2 years ago, there should be no issue because the Niners just have this size advantage, and I think that size advantage will overwhelm Dallas to a point eventually in the run game.
I definitely agree. I think the 49ers bring like a little bit more of a physical, maybe gritty style to their game. I think Dallas can be a little bit glitz and glam. They can. I feel like if Dallas can like come out and punch you right away, sometimes you've seen them be able to like really capitalize on that. You look at the Patriots game that just happened. I do think like maybe if they're leading, they can get that momentum and really carry it. But the type of style that the 49ers want to play, that Kyle Shanahan wants to coach, kind of run game. I think this game will have a lot more of those like short passes. Dallas has been not as it's been like bottom of the league at preventing yak, which is how you said it just comes off as a favorable matchup for the 49ers with how physical they will. Like, I don't think we've seen Dallas yet kind of get down, whether or not like in points or just in gritty in like back and forth situations and then come back and win. They seem to be a team where if they're winning,
runners. Yeah, they are front runners. Absolutely.
We've seen the 49ers struggle and then like come back. I think that they almost kind of thrive in that. Sometimes I'm watching these games and I feel like they're so dominant, but then you look at the score and it's actually not as like big of a discrepancy as you would think. But then by the end of the game, at least this season, they're winning by like way more. It's almost like they kind of sometimes can let teams stick around, but then they don't really have a problem with shutting them down eventually, at least knock on wood so far, where I think Dallas struggles a little bit more with that. With the Dallas questions, I wanted to ask you about it, and this is more...
Before we go, do you mind pulling up the super chats? I think we got a couple. I just don't want to miss those.
For sure. Okay. Oh, I'm so excited. Okay, so Juwan says, speaking of Juwan, injuries, really quickly. Debo and Juwan were both out at practice. They were limited, but said that they were going to play. Charvarius Ward is still dealing with a heel injury, but he got that heel injury before week 1, and he's been like dealing with it every week. So I think he's still going to play. Dre Greenlaw was not out there, but Dre Greenlaw wasn't even out there last Friday's practice and still practice because of his, or still played because of his ankle. So I imagine that will happen. There was something else that I wrote down too. I think that was it. Oh, John Feliciano is also
He's
out.
in concussion
Yeah,
protocol.
concussion protocol. Yeah. But I think the most important ones are that Debo and Jawan seem good to go. That was all. But anyways, Jawan wrote in a comment, and he said, going to the game with my wife this weekend. Any suggestions on the
Can you
best?
pull it up on here?
Oh.
Just
Yeah, I can. Wow. Going. Sorry,
thanks.
I'm new to this, guys.
No worries.
Do you want to read it or do you want me to?
No, you can go ahead.
Okay, going to the game with my wife this weekend. Any suggestions on the best tailgates? First timer here at Levi's. That's such a wonderful question for not me, because I have also not gone to a game. If you are on Twitter, I would hit up Roscoe's on Twitter. He's the one that always hosts all the spaces. Or John Chaplin. I don't think Chapman. He always hosts like a tailgate and a party that tons of 49er fans go to. He promotes that on his Twitter and potentially Instagram too. So I would check out both of those people for better recommendations. I personally don't know, and I don't know if Vish knows. Do you know, Vish?
Yeah, unfortunately, no. I've never tailgated at Levi's Stadium, but I'm sure it's really fun and enjoy the game with your wife.
Yeah, have such a good time. That'll be great. It should be like really nice weather too. Hopefully it's not too hot. Stay hydrated. Okay, and then we have one more super chat. Feels like the Niners are well positioned to make a trade. If you had to put your money on which position group they would likely trade for, which one would it be? Vish, you want to start off?
Yeah, I think they'll ultimately make a trade to acquire a corner. I don't know that it'll be the kind of corner that people are asking for. Like, I think people are hoping that there will be like a Pat Surtain trade. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think they'll trade for one. Yeah.
I also, just reflecting on that rumor, don't think that they will, because I think the capital they would have to give up would be like, they're just now getting a first round pick, and eventually they're going to need to draft a lineman. And I think that they would want to do that this next season coming in. I don't think they're going to want to give up a first and however many else. But I agree. There, or potentially like a D lineman, maybe potentially more backups going on there.
For sure, they've definitely traded for them in the past. So yeah, I mean, Jordan
Willis, that seems consistent. Seems consistent. But yeah, I think I could even see, knock on so much wood, I could even see like a running back, like a more low level running back, if because Elijah Mitchell was the one that I was forgetting with the injuries just now, is out still. And they've just been putting such a workload on Christian McCaffrey, and which I totally understand, because he's like, when you have him in the game and then you have a different one of the running backs in the game, you see how much more explosive it is. So I do understand his workload, but either depending on injury or depending on if Kyle, maybe I was hypothesizing, I'd love to know your opinion, that potentially Kyle hasn't gone to Jordan. It's actually probably just because he loves Christian McCaffrey. But if it wasn't that, I was hypothesizing that it could be Jordan Mason really struggled with ball security this offseason. And I don't know what's going on with Ty Davis Price. I don't really understand. He hasn't even been dressed for the last couple games?
Yeah, right? But I think it's just because they have a pecking order. But specifically with Mason and Davis Price, I think it's just a lack of trust with pass protection assignments, and then in the pass game specifically. Mason did have the nice catch against Arizona, so that was nice to see. But specifically, I think that they don't trust either of those two guys in those two situations. I mean, when you look at both of them in the preseason, for example, they both had a couple of protection busts, definitely. I mean, Davis Price had the worst one, which was in Brock Purdy's first drive against the Broncos. They had a low play action. He goes low to cut. I don't know why he's cutting, and he's cutting from like 2 yards away, and he puts his face in the dirt and he eats dirt. So I think that's the biggest reason. I think specifically Mitchell, they obviously trust, but I think that the fact
Injuries
that he
are
keeps getting hurt, does.
Yeah, more of an issue for him. I definitely agree that it would be like corner, defensive lineman would be like the first. My hypothesis was just like if there really is that like lack of trust within the other running backs behind Christian McCaffrey, and if injury or maybe like injury prevention is on Kyle's mind, that I just feel like D linemen and running backs, you can never like underestimate the the want for Kyle to go get them. So that could definitely be one of those. Okay, we actually have another super chat. The fact that we beat an NFL team, Cardinals, with only 2 weapons speaks volumes to our potential on offense. Brock is also becoming a weapon as well. I agree. I was very shocked. I think Kittle was targeted on that 4th down. Debo, I think, got 1 or 2 targets. But yeah, it was definitely mostly a Christian McCaffrey and Ayuk game. And I'm kind of hypothesizing that it'll be similar. Maybe I could see a big Debo game because I think Yak will be important because the Cowboys are so bottom of the league at preventing that. But I think it'll be another big Christian McCaffrey game. But I think that that's pretty common on this team where there's so many options. I always I don't play fantasy, but I have a friend who does, and they're like, you never want to choose a 49ers player because like Ayuk can have the best game ever this week and then the next week get 3 targets. And so I think just with so many stars, that makes sense. I don't think it's going to be super common that there's going to be games where all of them go off because there's just like not enough. Like we have so many Pro Bowlers or almost Pro Bowlers, or because I think Ayuk is Pro Bowl caliber. I'd also love to talk to you. This is side note ish, but I think Deebo Samuel is a number 1 wide receiver. I think he is the best wide receiver on this team. I think he has been. And I see this a lot within the 49ers community is like kind of Ayuk being that guy. And he's definitely taking that. I feel like this year I actually see him taking that step. But sometimes I felt like in the past, there's been previous years where fans have kind of been like, oh, he's taking that step now. And I felt like there were certain moments that maybe he didn't like take it there. Like there was just never that like exact catch at the right moment, that exact, Debo like has stood out. Debo has performed so well. I do think Ayuk is having that season now. But you can address the question before whatever I just said. Do you think that Brock is becoming an offensive weapon? And do you think that it's exciting that the 49ers were able to win using basically only 2 of their skill position players?
The skill position players, I think it just so happened. I think you described that really well with just how usage gets split because the Niners have so many good players. And then in regard to Brock becoming a weapon, I mean, anytime you have a quarterback that can go 20 of 21 in a game, he's absolutely a weapon.
Yeah, breaking Steve Young's record. I mean, I've been extremely
21
impressed.
and 22.
Yes, I've been extremely impressed with Brock, and I have been a bit of a Brock skeptic this entire time. Going back to the like Kyle Shanahan speaking so much more highly on Brock, I was one of those people this offseason with his elbow injury and with everything happening, and like Sam Darnold being the backup quarterback, I was like, we should not trade Trey. I was very against that, and I feel like I've really had to eat my words as the season has started because not only has Brock looked so good, his elbow has not looked very inhibited at all. Maybe I did think that Thursday night game he looked a little shaky, but he was also blitzed like an unreal amount. So I think it was probably more of that than his elbow. I agree. Brock Purdy has looked extremely, extremely impressive. Let me make sure there's no more of these super chats. Oh, this one. This is the one that I'm currently on. That's why it's a different color. Sweet. Sorry. Okay. So okay, I wanted to say because we were talking about the matchup between the Cowboys and the 49ers, and maybe that the 49ers have a good scheme or they match up well against the Cowboys, like the Cowboys' deficiencies potentially are something that the 49ers could take advantage of with that yak and everything. But that does like I've been interested in, I think a lot of people want to compare the quarterbacks, which we can get to, but I would be interested in your opinion of our defense and the lack of sacks that have been happening. If you have an opinion on that, and if you were to rate the 49ers defense and the Dallas Cowboys defense going into this game, because they did just lose Trayvon Diggs 2 weeks ago. Which defense do you think will have more success at limiting the opposing team's offense?
I think the 49ers defense will, but that's because I think the 49ers have a better offense than Dallas. In regards to which defense is better, I do think Dallas's defense has played a little bit better this year, but I don't think it's that far off. The big difference is Dallas's defense has forced a few more turnovers than the 49ers defense. And so that I think that's been the factor that's made a lot of people think Dallas's defense has looked exceptionally better. Now, in regards to the Niners defense, because I think what you're asking, and with defensive struggles under in the topic, like what I think the number one issue is with the defense, I think the biggest thing is just there's been a lack of disguise with their defense. So they line up, and this was through the first 3 weeks. 78.8% of the time, the Niners defense shows the same picture pre-snap that they show post-snap with no disguise, and they play kind of line up and play what they're in. So this is middle of the field closed, which means single high, versus middle of the field open, which means two high safeties. The Niners play single high 56% of the time. They play two high 43% of the time. With 39.4% of the time that they line up in single high, which means middle of the field closed, they play middle of the field closed. They play single high. So they play cover one or cover three. 39.4% of the time when they line up middle of the field open, which means they line up in two high, they play either quarters, they play cover two, they play two man. They line up and they play it. So the Niners only are disguising what they're doing on defense 20% of the time in terms of defensive coverage structure, middle of the field close to middle of the field open. 16.6% of the time in their defensive snaps, they line up in middle of the field open and a safety rotates down. So they go from two high to single high. And then only 3.6% of the time they go from single high and they have a safety roll back into two high. And so I think that while those numbers aren't really large for the Niners, even in years past, I think that this is a bigger discrepancy in terms of lack of disguise than in years past. I think that that's been kind of the one issue that I would say they feel a little too simple right now. They kind of line up and just line up in what they're lining up in and play. And so that's where if you ask me, like with Steve Wilks, I think that the expectation is he's going to put more of a creative flavor on this defense, because that's something we've seen in the past, and I think that's yet to come. But right now we're seeing the Niners defense go through an adjustment period where they're adjusting to a coach who's adjusting to calling a defense that's new to him with personnel that's new to him. And I think that we can't expect that to be totally seamless. And I think it's not realistic to pretend like, I mean, even with D'Amico was an internal hire. He had been around. He had been a part of Robert Saleh installing this defense. And there were growing pains for him because Josh Norman was playing corner for the first 8-9 games that he was calling this defense. And so there's going to be similar growing pains like that with Wilks. Even with those growing pains, they have the third best defense in the NFL. And I would expect their disguise percentage will be a lot different by the end of the season.
Definitely. I've also hypothesized that, like, as the team gets more comfortable and Wilks gets more comfortable throughout the season, the flow of things would definitely improve. Do you think that and you did say that there is like a bigger lack of disguise than in previous years under D'Amico and those guys. Do you think that the lack of disguise is what's affecting Nick Bosa's lack of sack production? And I want to be clear that he is making a huge impact. People that are way smarter than me, like Rich Madrid, has posted tons of clips on Twitter breaking down, and so is Jordan Elliott on Twitter has breaking down the pressure that Nick Bosa is bringing and the opportunity for sacks from Hargrave and other people that he is causing by getting that pressure. But I mean, I feel like he's always been double teamed a ton, and he's always been getting pressure, and there's just like I'm interested because I think I've heard the narrative like now that he's paid. I don't think Nick Bosa is like that at all. I think he's an extremely determined person. I think he wants to be successful, whether or not money has anything to do with it. So why do you think that there is that lack of like getting home all the way? Is it that the 49ers, I've had this hypothesis that because the 49ers have kind of had a lead, that maybe and maybe like to negate a little bit of Nick Bosa, much like I think coming into the Cowboys game that the 49ers are going to try to get the ball out quickly to potentially minimize Parsons. Are teams doing that more often, like getting the ball out more quickly, throwing it? So maybe that's why. Why do you think Nick Bosa has had a drop in production? Is it just because he wasn't in football shape, quote unquote, to start the year? What do you think?
Well, one, I don't know that he wasn't in football shape to start the year because he played really well week 2. He didn't play a lot week 1, so it was tough to really tell, but he played really well week 2. 2, I don't know that he's not been Nick Bosa to start this season. I mean, we're 4 games into the year, and he didn't practice pretty much the entire offseason. And yeah, he doesn't have 8 sacks, but he does have a sack, and he has a handful of pressures. 3, he's been doubled more than any defensive lineman in the league by a considerable margin. And I think the difference is the Niners don't really care if he's doubled this year. In previous years, they would make certain adjustments if he was getting doubled to try and get him a one-on-one. But this year, if he gets doubled, that's a one-on-one that Javon Hargrave's going to win or Eric Armstead's going to win inside. And both of those guys have been playing at an unbelievable level inside. So I don't know that there's a large emphasis to ensure that Nick Bosa is the guy with the one-on-one. Because if Nick Bosa doesn't have a one-on-one, Hargrave wins one-on-one like 99% of the time. The guy's a monster. Guys that with his body type aren't supposed to move the way he does. It's a very unique combination of leverage, strength, and explosion that he has. And then finally, I would say that the last point in all of this is that I think his production is going to come. Sometimes that you can have a dry spell with sacks where you're getting there, but you're just a couple steps away. Nick Bosa had this problem earlier in his career when he would rack up a bunch of pressures, but he wouldn't finish plays. And I don't really understand the freak out. I feel like, okay, there needs to be something to talk about. So let's talk about this. I think Nick Bosa will fall into some stats very, very soon, but I don't know that anything he's doing, like if it was a case where Nick Bosa needs to sack the quarterback for the 49ers to be more successful on defense, then I think that it would require a little bit more research to understand why he's not doing that. But right now, I don't think that anything he's doing is detrimental or the 49ers defense is worse by, holy cow, Nick Bosa doesn't have 8 sacks now. You would love for him to have 8 sacks, but I don't know that he's really missed out on opportunities to do that. And he's done his job at a pretty high level. So I again, that entire conversation, I don't get it. People keep having it, and I guess it's relevant right now, but that's one that doesn't make too much sense to me.
Okay. Sorry, Jordan Elliott wrote something in there, and I was like, what did he say? Because it might be important. But he was asking you about, do you know what this means?
Yeah, I do. ask him what happened to City last weekend. Arsenal had a quality Bournemouth performance. We won't talk about what happened in the Champions League game yesterday, though.
Is that soccer?
Yeah, EPL.
I knew. What is the other thing that you're into? Tennis, right?
I'm into a lot of sports. I watch tennis. I watch soccer. Soccer's what I grew up playing. I watch football, obviously, obsessively. Basketball. Yeah, I follow a lot of sports. A few more in there.
Okay.
Baseball is the only one I don't really follow.
Yeah, I'm not big on. I went to some baseball games in high school, but I found them kind of boring. But I because people would consider me a casual at baseball, I feel like I would like the new rule where there's like a timing to it, because that's how I felt. I felt like there was just never a good pacing. But we'll stop talking about that. And I am interested in. So I think that keys to winning for the 49ers would be protecting the ball, getting the ball out quickly, maybe running at Micah Parsons. I've seen like that's a good way that Arizona game planned against them is like whenever they were running, they kind of ran at him, which I guess can negate some of his impact. What about Brock Purdy versus Dak? I feel like that could be an interesting little side note. Which one do you think is currently playing better? Which one do you think it's even fair to realistically compare them because Dak has been in the league for so much longer and Purdy's sample size right now is so like it's obviously incredible, but it's kind of like, okay, does this stand the test of time? I for sure think Dak he's having a better year against with not turning it over as much, but I mean he still has turned it over a lot, and I think he's like I think previously before his injury, something that we could be concerned about with him going against the 49ers is his movement ability, but he has had a lot less movement ability since his injury. So what do you think? Who do you think is a better quarterback? And do you think that's even a fair question for me to ask?
Yeah, I know what Dak's numbers are. I've like TV watched Dak a little bit this year, but I haven't like watched Dak to have a strong opinion on whether Dak's been playing well or poorly this year. I've heard the other strong opinions in regard to it, but I don't have one personally. I think Purdy has played pretty well this year. In regard to who's the better quarterback, it's like, well, I mean, if you're looking at their sample size, it becomes very difficult to compare the two. I mean, Dak has started for the last 8 years. It's a big deal. It's not easy to start in the NFL 8 years back to back to back at quarterback. There's a lot of people that we thought were really good for a long time that don't start 8 years back to back to back in the NFL. It's not easy to do. And Purdy's 11 starts into his career. Now they've been 11 fantastic starts, reaching the highest of highs for somebody playing just those 11 games, but it's also just been 11 games. And so it's very difficult to compare the two because Dak has accomplished things that we need to wait and see with Purdy, but then Purdy has accomplished things in a small sample size that we have yet to see Dak accomplish. But in regard to how Dak's playing again, sorry, I if I get to watching Dak, I hope to do it like Friday or Saturday sometime before the game, but I might not get to and just see it live. But I think Dak's had a pretty good season. And in regards to the turnovers, as far as I thought, and I couldn't pull it up in time, I thought Dak had only thrown a pick this year, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he's
Against
thrown
the
a lot
Cardinals, he
more.
threw against. I think last year. I was going to say this year he's had much better
Yeah,
turnover luck. Last year
And
was his like career high.
last year with Dak, part of the issue was he had a bunch of tip balls that turned into picks, and we've
Just
seen. I
bad luck.
mean, as Niners fans, we've seen those
Yeah,
can go either way. So yeah,
yeah, we've definitely gotten extremely lucky with that. With that, I'm curious your opinion. Will your opinion on Purdy change if the 49ers win or lose this game? Because I think you hear that narrative, right? Like this is going to be their first test. This defense will be Purdy's first test. Do you think if they win or lose, you'll think higher or lesser of Purdy, or do you think it'll depend on like how they win or lose? Because they could like it could be like okay, he turns the ball over a ton and is really bad, or they could just lose because the kicker can't kick. And I mean that was a huge problem for Dallas last year. I know they have a new
no,
kicker now, but you know.
no, because my opinion of Purdy is not like good or bad. It's not like, oh, he does these things so he's good, or he does these things so he's bad. Good or bad is very easy to evaluate. All of us can see good or bad just based on the statistics, based on the team result, and all of that. My evaluation of Purdy and my mindset of Purdy is what his skill set is. And I don't think that that changes whether he plays good or bad. If he plays well more consistently with his skill set, then he's a good quarterback. If he plays bad more consistently with his skill set, then he's a bad one. But for me, one game is not going to shift that unless we see a drastic change where all of a sudden he's making throws that he couldn't make previously, or he's incapable of making throws he could make previously, or he moves very differently than he used to. If we see that type of a change, then all of a sudden I change my evaluation of him as a quarterback. But how he performs to me, can be somewhat circumstantial and is hard to take in a small sample size and say, oh, he's now this or that. And I think we've had an ability to give a strong take, not on whether he's good or bad, because I think he's been overwhelmingly good. We're just not sure how good yet. But we have been able to see what his skill set is, what are the things he does well, and what are the things he does poorly. And over the course of 11 games, I think that playing the 12th game poorly is not going to change what he does well or what he does poorly.
I agree. And I think that sudden, like how you said, the one thing that would kind of change your opinion, it would be like a sudden change in ability or escapability, arm strength, anything like that. I think maybe coming into the season, that was what some of us were afraid of, was like, okay, we kind of know who he is or who he's been so far, but coming off this injury, is there going to be some big change? And there wasn't, which is fantastic for the 49ers. And they definitely had confidence in that. And I think that is great. I had something else that I wanted to ask you that right now is blanking. But do you think Ayuk has broken out this year? Do you think like this year he is a different on a different level than he has been previous years? Have you heard those fan narratives that maybe like Ayuk is the true number one receiver on this team? And do you think that is accurate in comparison to other wide receivers on the team? And do you think that he looks like he's playing at a different level, whether that's contract or just ability? What's your opinion on Ayuk? Because we were talking about Purdy. I think a lot of people were worried that Purdy would limit a player like Ayuk, and we're kind of seeing the opposite. We're kind of seeing him shine right now under Purdy with the chemistry that he has with him.
Yeah, I think Ayuk has 100% broken out. I think he broke out in a smaller capacity last year where he ascended into playing like a top 15, 20-ish receiver. And then this year he's playing like a top 5 receiver, honestly. He wins on every route this year. He has such great urgency. They talk about landmarks. Eric Branch asked that nice question. Ayuk hits his landmarks and is so quarterback friendly with how he runs his routes to show the quarterback that he's open. And then him and Purdy have an innate chemistry unlike anything I've seen from a 49ers quarterback and wide receiver. They play so fast with each other. They play with such incredible timing. Purdy's anticipation playing with Ayuk is so incredible. He has such trust for where Ayuk is going to be, and he has such faith in Ayuk's ability to make him right on where he puts the ball. And it's so cool to see them playing really, really well together. I think that the idea that Ayuk's issues, and I discussed some of this briefly, but I guess it never came up in the shows that I was doing as much. But some of Ayuk's issues with Jimmy was more of a timing thing rather than, oh, Jimmy doesn't have the arm strength to take advantage of Ayuk. That was, I think, a narrative out there, which was very false. I think that it was always like, oh, Trey Lance is going to capitalize with Ayuk because of his arm strength. But no, it was always going to be about the timing because Ayuk is a precise route runner. And we're seeing that Purdy, who plays with great timing and anticipation, which Jimmy didn't play with, is able to take advantage of that. And I'm not so sure Trey Lance would have been able to either with his stronger arm because we hadn't seen him play with a level of precise timing or anticipation up to that point. But that's a moot topic. I think that's honestly irrelevant. And then in regard to Ayuk's breakout, yeah, absolutely. I think everybody was expecting it 2 years ago. He wasn't ready for it then. Last year was a great emergence for him to just get confident. And now this year, yeah, I think he's playing like one of the 5 best receivers in football right now. I've watched a good amount of the people that would be in that conversation, and again, confidently saying it, I think that Brandon Ayuk this year is one of the 5 best receivers in football so far, for sure.
Do you think he's playing at a better level than CeeDee Lamb right now?
Yeah. It's the only people I think are playing at a higher level than Ayuk or Jefferson and Diggs.
Yeah.
Who else?
I
don't know.
I agree. Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. But they play differently. Tyreek Hill, speed. But
that's a good point.
You brought up Trey Lance, which reminded me there. What do you think about, and what do you think about the narrative that Trey Lance is going to help the Dallas Cowboys win by exposing the 49ers secrets? Yeah, can you explain that that's not how that works?
Yeah, I don't get that one. That one's a wild one to me. Like Brian Hoyer's played the 49ers how many different times since he left? He hasn't exposed any secrets. Um, do I think Trey Lance might have an understanding of what they do on offense? Yeah, but I think Dan Quinn has that same understanding because he turns on the film and he's studying this offense. They're going to have a good idea of the Niners' tendencies because not just because Trey Lance told them, because they're going to study up and be ready for this game. But just because you have an idea of what the team is going to do and just because they have an idea of what you're going to do does not mean that, holy cow, you're just going to now kick their butts. You have to get 11 people to execute in terms of stopping what they're doing. And yeah, and the problem with the Niners offense as well is just because so much of it is built to look the same and everything builds off of this. Like, okay, we're going to set you up by running this play. And now when you're looking for this play, we have this variation off of it that screws you. Okay, if they say, okay, this is what the Niners offense is looking for and they run the variation, yeah, they're screwed.
Yeah, I agree. When I heard that narrative, I feel like players are traded every single day in the NFL, and if that's how that worked, I guess everyone would be beating each other.
Yeah, it's a good
and
way to
also the
say it.
49ers,
Then they would never trade anybody.
Yeah, because they'd be like, oh, this is so precious. We can't
Right.
like the 49ers willingly traded Trey Lance to the Dallas Cowboys. So they were clearly not very worried about, one, his future success, which is crazy, but just because they're the ones that initially traded for him. But so they weren't very confident in that. And then they definitely weren't afraid of him exposing anything because they knew that they were going to face the Cowboys week 5. So I agree that I don't think that's a major concern. Although, I mean, I do think, like, I'm sure, because it was the Dallas offensive coordinator that came out. Like, this wasn't like a fan rumor. It was the Dallas offensive coordinator that came out and we're like,
He's
we're going to utilize mind games. Which is interesting. Okay, have you heard, like, the way that Micah Parsons, the way that Jerry Jones earlier this week was like, yeah, I think the Niners might win the Super Bowl. Micah Parsons had tons of praise for how the 49ers have been playing, for Brock Purdy specifically, for the defense on his own. I think he does his own podcast. I saw clips of it on Twitter. But he was like praising the Niners, which is kind of ironic if you think back to like 2021 when he was first making comments. What did he say? He was like, the bullies are going to bully the bull, or we're going to bully the bullies. And I felt like he had a much more confident tone about him. And now I'm sure that he's still very confident, but it is interesting the way that he's going about approaching that sort of conversation compared to before. Have you even heard that? And do you think that, because you said mind games, do you think that sweet talking the 49ers does anything? Why would they be?
No, I don't think it makes a difference. I just think all of this gets greater publicity because week to week, everything that's said in Dallas media is put on a national scale. And I think we're just not used to that being done for a Niners opponent. But in any game, I think most people talk the exact same way Dallas has talked. I don't think it's just put on national TV for every single quote. That's all.
There we go. I just wanted to check to make sure we didn't have any more super chats because I saw little numbers on those. I agree that I don't think that the way that they talk super matters, but I do find it interesting. I think that has to be like, at least for Micah Parsons specifically, it has to be like a change in respect. Like, they've been beaten by the 49ers. Okay, do you think, because I heard this too, like I heard if the Cowboys lose this week, that then that will somehow like defeat them. And if we like defeat them mentally, and then if the 49ers were then going to face them in the playoffs, that it would just be like this impossible mental battle for the Cowboys to overcome. And when I heard that narrative, I thought about the Rams and how in the regular season, the 49ers have absolutely killed the Rams, and that did not crush their confidence in their ability to beat us. Although potentially if Debo would have gotten the ball in the last 13 minutes of that game, things would have been differently, but that is a problem to not bring up currently. Do you think that if the 49ers win this game that is going to mentally crush the Dallas Cowboys for a future playoff performance?
No. They have to show up and play the next time if they have to play. I think some of this stuff gets overdone a little bit because you have to sell the story of the game, and it's a good story when a team has to overcome the biggest, greatest of odds. That's why every single athlete ever has to overcome the greatest of odds, because that's the best story, David versus Goliath, right? Like, I mean, the Chiefs, if they win the Super Bowl this year, they were on paper Vegas favorites, and they'll come out and say, everybody doubted us this year. Nobody thought we would do it. They all do that little bullshit. And so,
Didn't
and so, yeah,
Kelsey did that last year?
I think that a lot of this is just cheap talk.
Okay, interesting. Travis Kelsey did do that last year. He was like, everyone doubted us. I was like, I think you guys were at the top of the odds to win. But I'm glad you felt good. Okay, I also wanted to touch on, did you see the Richard Sherman podcast with Jimmy Ward? Were you able to catch part of it, the whole thing? And specifically, I wanted to ask you about the comments that he made about him and his relationship with Kyle Shanahan, because an overall theme that I've tried to make of the show that I probably have done a horrible job at because I'm still new to creating some sort of flow. But like, I have had this idea that I don't even know if it's real because I'm a fan and not in the locker room and not a media member. But I have had this idea that this is somehow like a new 49er team, that there's like some unity that hasn't been seen, at least in the past, like previous seasons, comparing it to all the way back to 2019 when they did make the Super Bowl. But specifically once they, even 2019, like I felt like the quarterback controversy that was happening, drafting Trey Lance, but even previously every year, kind of the rumors of wanting to move off Jimmy, I kind of felt like that was over like an overall theme that players were always asked about, and that it potentially was like distracting, whether or not it was like actually just not having a stable quarterback was distracting, or if it was the media that was distracting. I think the fact that they didn't have one person that the locker room and the coach clearly believed in could have been problematic. And that now this year, I feel like I have noticed like a certain unity and determination, like, hey, we've made it this far every year. And like, I feel like there's a bigger determination to, or not even determination, but a bigger like togetherness than ever before. And that could just be made up because I'm not in the locker room, but it does feel like everyone, like the players believe in Kyle Shanahan believes in the quarterback, and it seems very unison right now. So when I came up with that theory, I was like, oh, okay, like people are very confident in Kyle and people are very trustworthy and like believe in Kyle a lot and believe in what he says. But then I was listening to, and you always hear players kind of talk about him as like a players coach, like kind of friendly, although like give it to they people have said like he's not going to BS you, like he's going to give it to you straight, but they've said that in a way like that they respect that he does that, like that it comes across in a way that is not kind, because that doesn't sound good, but like in a way that seems respectful, I guess. But then when you listen to Jimmy Ward speak on the Richard Sherman podcast, it did not come across that way. And the fact that Richard Sherman even brought it up, it kind of like, to me, reminded like if I'm a friend and I'm always gossiping about, my uncle or something to my other friend, it seemed like Richard Sherman even was like, oh, I know what you're talking about. Did you have any thoughts on Jimmy Ward's comments about his relationship with Kyle Shanahan and how they handled the end of Jimmy Ward's career? And then also about his comments on whether or not he thought Jimmy Garoppolo could go last season?
Yeah, I didn't have a lot of thoughts on the Jimmy Ward contract situation, what he thought, because I know the story, and I can't share the story.
Okay.
But I know the full story of what happened with Jimmy Ward's contract. And so that one didn't really surprise me. It didn't surprise me that he had some negative feelings on the way out. But I also just understand that that's the business of the NFL, and that's just kind of what happens. And that's why when you understand, hey, and that's why sometimes even being loyal to a team as a fan can be difficult, because it's a dirty business like any other corporation. And I think the problem is that people deify the NFL a little bit because they project some childhood feeling of unity where the coach is kind of like a father figure in their life when they're playing like Park District sports and you're all best friends and you have orange slices after the game and you sing kumbaya. But that's not the reality of what the actual sport is like. It's just like any other workplace, and the NFL is a business, just like any other corporation, with the number one goal to make money. And therefore, whatever crappy things happen for any other person in corporate America happens to these guys in the NFL. They're just paid double the scale of the average person in corporate America. And people sometimes, I think, find it difficult to relate because they're relating the wrong things to that. These people are coworkers, they're employees, they work in this place all together the same way anybody else works with their peers in any other job. It just so happens that their profession is a sport that people usually project and identify childhood memories with. And that's where I think there is a little bit of a conflation in how people talk about it. Specifically in regards to his quote about Garoppolo playing, I think it's been taken a little bit out of context because what he says immediately after is he references Earl Thomas, who was having an all pro season his final year with Seattle, and he snapped his leg in Josh Rosen's first career game against Arizona. And he snaps his leg and gets carted off the field. And when he's going, he flicks off Pete Carroll in the sideline. Why did Earl Thomas do that? Because they were making Earl Thomas, who was arguably the greatest player in that franchise's history, at least in that portion of the history, in the Legion of Boom Seahawks, in that era of Seattle Seahawks football, you could argue that Earl Thomas was the single best football player of that era for the Seattle Seahawks. And they didn't give him a second contract after a long dispute. And now he had gotten hurt, which hurt his opportunity to get money. Now, Earl Thomas was lucky enough to get a bullshit, horrible, great contract in his case from Baltimore that he only played 1 year on before him and his brother had some fun and that entire thing happened. But that's what Jimmy Ward was referencing when he was talking about Garoppolo. And that's where I think that the situation with Garoppolo is a little more complicated than, wait, was there a chance he could have played? Because there was a business thing involved. And if you're Garoppolo, realistically, as much as every 49ers fan wants Garoppolo to play for their team because that's what he's supposed to do, and we're all supposed to give up everything for the team because that's what, like, we're taught as kids, like, hey, kids, give up everything for the team, be that selfless person. If you're Garoppolo, you're still somewhat hurt. You have to put your body on the line, but you know that you also have the capacity to make $25 million a year in your next contract, and you don't want to hurt that, especially when you're not going to reach any of the incentives with the 49ers. You had to make the same business decision that the 49ers had to make. The 49ers made a business decision with Jimmy Ward that forced Jimmy Ward to feel a little bit upset about it, and the 49ers felt a little bit upset. It's the same thing vice versa that Jimmy Garoppolo made a business decision. I don't think it's the big deal that it's been made out to be. I think it's a big deal, again, because people want to believe that everybody sings Kumbaya in the locker room, so therefore that everybody should give up everything for the league and the team. And stories like when Ronnie Lott gets the tip of his finger amputated get deified to the point and sensationalized to the point that it feels like any player who doesn't give up anything for the team is somehow doing something wrong. I just feel like it's the business of the NFL. Garoppolo made a business decision for himself. The 49ers constantly make business decisions for themselves. As a fan, it sucks, but that's the reality. I can't really disparage anybody for doing what they feel is in their best interest.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like I tend to side with players on this. You have a very short career. You know that the second you're hurt and that if the team can save money, that they're not going to prioritize you. So it is extremely important to prioritize yourself. I think it would have been a cool story if Jimmy could have came back. But I mean, he got himself a lot of money for that Raiders contract that is looking very interesting.
And he wasn't healthy. Right, he needed surgery anyway. So who the hell knows?
Yeah, that's true. I remember people were saying, like, I think it was David Lombardi at the time. They were like, prior to that game, he kept saying like he was going to be able to come back, and then he ended up needing a whole other surgery. Like he definitely wasn't. He missed training camp with the Raiders. Like he wasn't even close to
right. Well, but then David Lombardi was also adamant that Garoppolo always could come back at the moment of his injury. He was the one tweeting out the timeline saying that he would come back by that period. So who knows?
Yeah. That was interesting. But yeah, I mean, I found Jimmy. I do see what you mean. Like I think it's hard for fans to completely like separate, because and even probably players, because I think in order to put your body on the line for the team, which I know it's also for money, I think you do have to buy into that camaraderie. Like they do call each other brothers and family. Those terms are thrown around when
They call each
discussing.
other brothers and family when they're winning.
Interesting.
They
Yeah.
all make business decisions when they're losing. They
That's
understand the
true.
nature of the business. I think it's just to sell the sport in a better way because people like the group of people that do it together against the world. Like those are the
Which is
stories people
why
like.
it's so annoying during off seasons. Like if this season with Brandon Ayuk, if he wants a ton of money and does something like with the Debo situation, it wasn't as bad with Nick Bosa. I think he was a little bit more quiet about it, but I think it started to get there when there was like a chance that he was going to miss game one, with fans being highly critical of players when they're kind of trying to make sure that they're getting what they deserve, which they definitely need to do, because the team would do the same thing, as we can tell from Jimmy Ward's comments. But I mean, I did think, even though I know that, like in my
But
rational
he's the
brain,
perfect example, right? He's the longest tenured player on the team. He switched his position 3 different times in the regime. If you remember, he was supposed to be their starting safety in 2017. He got hurt. They ended up thinking Adrian Colbert was their starting safety. Terrible decision. Jimmy Ward was a corner in 2018. They moved him
yeah,
back to safety after bringing him back on a 1-year deal in 2019. He plays terrific. They give him a 4-year contract extension. He has 2 great years at safety, and then they try to move him to be their nickel corner because they sign a veteran safety into Sean Gibson. So they made business decisions. He made business decisions. Now you can understand from his position, he's the longest tenured player on the team. He was a team captain. He was a vocal leader. He had always put the team first. He had made all of these different sacrifices for the organization. And they still didn't make any effort. Like they treated him like any other employee. There was no special treatment of Jimmy
yeah.
Ward because of all of that. And
It
I would say
sounded.
that I would criticize the 49ers if there was a special treatment to Jimmy Ward because of
Would you?
that, because that's not how you run a business. That's not how you succeed in the NFL. You have to make tough decisions, and sometimes tough decisions include people being upset, but you have to make decisions for the right reasons, because you have to do what's best for your football team. And similarly, Jimmy Ward had to do what's best for himself. He got a nice contract in Houston. He lives in Houston in the offseason, so it's perfect for him. That's a perfect situation for him, and he's played well in the couple of games that he's played. And again, relating that to Garoppolo made a decision to put himself first. He made a decision that he felt was best for himself, and I'm never going to disparage him for that. And similarly, I wouldn't disparage the 49ers for feeling upset about it, but I also wouldn't disparage them for making any decision like in the Jimmy Ward situation when they do something business-wise that's best for themselves.
Definitely. I agree. I found it. I think, like I said, even in my rational mind, I can go, okay, this is a business and everything. I did find it hard to hear Jimmy Ward. Like it definitely seemed. It's the way he described it was kind of like, maybe when he came into the league, he was more hopeful. Like, if I do everything right, if I change my position, if I do whatever they ask, that this team might treat me.
Let me put it like this. The interesting question about it is Jimmy Ward told that story about how Shanahan basically forced him to play nickel this year.
Yeah, said he
The
could sit if not.
49ers let's just pretend like they wanted to sign Jimmy Ward. Like, let's just go down to hypothetical land for a second.
Yeah.
Let's pretend like they wanted Jimmy Ward to sign for X amount of money this offseason, and they didn't officially offer it to him, but there was conversation about that offer with Jimmy Ward, and Jimmy Ward said no to it. If Jimmy Ward had said yes, do you think that they would have forced him to change his position to nickel? Or do you think part of that was knowing that he wasn't part of their long-term plans? Gibson might have been, so they could foster a year of Gibson and Hufanga and figure out the nickel situation later. Thought to ponder. Just saying. Who knows?
Definitely. And those like players aren't.
I can't say much more about the situation, but
and players aren't like neglect. Players aren't like oblivious to that. Like I think Jimmy Ward even made a comment that like at one point he wasn't going to come back for the Chiefs game, and on the podcast he was like, I knew I had to come back in the Chiefs game because I'm not stupid. I'm seeing the other players perform well, and like I know these players, they understand that it's a what have you done for me lately, league? I think a lot of people talk about, like, is there pressure that is put on necessarily by a team for a player to play injured? And I think whether or not, I think that can be debated. Like, there definitely might be literal, like, comments made, but I think also it just comes on, like, players aren't stupid. They're aware that they need to be there.
And there's no security regardless of how good you are or whatever. Like, you don't have a choice. Even if you're a really, really good player, they can cut you tomorrow. And we've seen that happen. And that's why they feel that innate pressure to keep working and keep getting better, because you just never know when the organization says goodbye to you.
This is off topic, but I had hypothesized this offseason that Nick Bosa was going to try to get a fully guaranteed contract. I thought that's why because when the contract came out, I didn't understand why they left it so long. Like, it didn't seem unlike anything that I thought that Nick Bosa was going to get. And so I was kind of a little bit frustrated. I'm like, okay, why wouldn't they have given this to him earlier and have had him show up to camp and everything? Before we found out what he got, when that process was going on, I was hypothesizing that maybe he was trying to push for that for fully guaranteed deal. Since we've seen quarterbacks push for it, I thought maybe defensive ends. I think I heard Taylor Lewan on a podcast like 2 years ago. Someone asked him, like, oh, well, why don't you try to get a fully guaranteed contract? And he was like, it'll start with quarterbacks getting it, then it'll be defensive ends. Like, it'll have to slowly go down the rankings of the most important positions in the NFL. But that's a side note. Just, we were talking about they can cut you whenever you want. And I was thinking about contracts and Nick Bosa's deal. But yeah. Let me check to make sure there's no more comments. Jimmy Ward wanted to play safety, not nickel or corner. Agree. He talked about that, and that's what he's doing in Houston right now. So, yeah. Do you have any other comments or anything that you have thought about with this upcoming matchup against Dallas, or the 4-0 start that the 49ers have had so far?
Nah, I have nothing else. I think we covered it all. Congratulations to you on starting your channel. This was very, very fun to do.
Thank you so much for joining me. This is a side note, but I mean, everyone in here is in here because of you. But I've so appreciated your knowledge. I feel like I've learned so much from your tweets, from listening to you over the last couple of years. And then just like personally, you being so kind and like explaining anything that I've ever had questions on. I really, really appreciate you coming on and all the insight that I get.
Anytime. I like talking to other people. I'm a fan. Other people are fans. I'm into this because I like talking about football. That's really the only thing that keeps me involved in it. The other stuff, I could take it or leave it. Some of the stuff that comes with being involved in talking about sports in any capacity. But I'm willing to talk to anyone and anyone as long as they just want to talk football. And you are very genuinely interested in the sport, and you always have a lot of things to say. And so I really enjoy doing this show.
Thank you so much. Well, hopefully we'll do more. And I really appreciate you coming on. And yeah, I know that because you're like racing from your job here, and you're definitely passionate about it. It comes across.
Oh, thank you.
So I really appreciate it. And I wanted to thank everyone for joining and for listening. And yeah, so have a great day. And I'm excited to see how the 49ers do against the Cowboys. Maybe all the things that we said will come true. Okay, bye.